Hello, friends. This is the School of Self-Worth. Welcome back. I am your host, Nicole Song. Today, you are in for a truly epic treat. We are welcoming in a woman I really admire who is breaking ground in so many ways and inspires me, honestly, all the time. Her name is Misa Chien, and Misa is the founder of The Authentic Asian, which is a community to help Asian American women feel less alone and more connected. I am personally a member and I have really loved the community, the connection, the people I've met, and all that I have learned from being part of this group. And today I'm so thrilled to have Misa because she really knows so much and has educated herself so much around all the racism and the bias towards Asian American women, particularly in leadership and corporate settings. And these are things that I've personally only started to really unpack. And so I love what Misa speaks to here, her own learnings for herself and how she shares it so powerfully with the world. Whether you are an Asian American woman or you are a woman who works with Asian American women, there is so much to learn here. So make sure you stay tuned for this conversation. And if you are an ambitious, mission driven Asian American woman who wants to manifest a promotion in 60 days while working 20% fewer hours, DM me promotion to @NicoleSong on Instagram, and I've got something there for you. Okay, let's get rolling on this incredible conversation. Misa, what a delight to have you on the School of Self-Worth. Welcome.
It's so great to connect with you, and I'm so honored to be here and that we found a time to talk today.
Yes, I love it. Thank you. Well, I really, so just a little background for me and Misa. I met her through the Authentic Asian, which is the amazing group that I'm part of, that she runs, that's really, really supporting Asian women in so many ways. And there was a conversation. So first of all, I love the group, Misa. So I thank you for creating this space that is just like a really beautiful, safe space for Asian women to be able to talk, to connect with each other. I've made so many really beautiful connections through that group. And I have questions that are related to something you shared on there, but let's actually, before I get ahead of myself, I would love to hear a little bit more about your own journey with self-worth, and like sort of what you even would say would be that first moment you started to recognize it might be something that's important and valuable for yourself. Because I know you have such a really diverse background that's going to be so interesting to everybody who's listening. But if you could start from that place, that's sort of the common ground for everybody.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I think because I was kind of the one and the only often in a very non-diverse community, I was very quiet and shy. Um, I look different than everyone else. Even though I do have a white mom, a lot of people would go up to and say, "Oh, are you adopted?" I knew that I didn't quite fit in. Luckily, I had a great family. I was very close to my sister. My Chinese grandfather really helped raise us. I was very close to him. He was almost like a dad to me. And so even though I had a great time at home, school was kind of this fight or flight situation. I really hated going to school. I was bullied a lot. I fit right into that stereotype, the quiet Asian. And it was augmented even more because I had dyslexia, not just mild, but I wouldn't say severe. It's quite in the middle. I could still go to school regularly. But I would have to work so hard just to get B's. I mean, so hard. I built such a strong work ethic. And that was really challenging. It was really challenging. I call it the ugly dyslexic duckling story. And to just not have that confidence for, you're in school the majority of your day as a child. And so I would really savor the summers and the holidays. And I still remember when I went to a new school, and that was my least favorite school from 6th grade to 12th grade. I went to this school. It was only the same 100 kids every year. And I got a tour of the school from an upperclassman that I really looked up to. And she's giving me a tour. And she says, "Okay, so this is the cafeteria where we eat. This is the locker rooms where we change." And I ask her, "Oh, what's that little brick building over there in the corner?" And she says, "Oh, that's where the stupid kids go. You don't need to worry about that." And so I don't think anything of it. until the next day, my mom says, you're going to the Learning Center. And that's that brick building. I find out that the brick building is the Learning Center. And so having to go into that building after school every day where the stupid kids go, being labeled that was hard growing up. And so I don't feel like I really built my self-worth at school, which is where you spend most of your time, until I got into UCLA. And I went to UCLA, a much more diverse environment where not everyone knew me. It's a huge school. You can kind of just blend in. And that's where I really blossomed and grew. And that's why I call it the ugly dyslexic duckling story, because I felt like a swan. I got discovered by by the top modeling agency in Los Angeles, which I'm still with. I started several successful businesses out of my college dorm room. It's where I found myself, and I found my self-worth, and that was huge.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
For sure.
I feel like, for so many of us, we have such different versions of that one. And I love that college was really the place that made that shift for you. Where would you say being Asian, you felt like played into your journey around self-worth, or the challenges you felt around it?
It fluctuates. It depends when you talk to me. I mean, I like to say UCLA was kind of my strengthening years. I became stronger and more resilient and more confident as a person. But of course, it never stays that way. I mean, success, confidence is never a straight path. And things will come up in your life that will make you fall down. And it's all about getting up again. I had a lot of confidence right out of college. I built a food truck, Nom Nom Truck. And it was really hard when it ended up failing. And that's when kind of I got back down again and I lost that confidence. And, I think I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and it's been a challenge being an Asian American woman. I can tell you so many crazy stories that have happened to me where I ask, is it because I'm Asian American or a person of color or a woman or all of those identities? And I still don't have the answer for that, because also being biracial is very confusing, because most people assume I'm Asian American, but a lot of people are thinking, oh, where are you really from? They know I'm not considered white. I know that, but I do feel like a lot of the stuff that's happened to me, I think, okay, it's definitely because of one of those three things, but I'm not exactly sure what some of the comments I receive or some of the actions that are taken.
Mm-hmm. I mean, isn't that so true? I think for any person of color, and I feel the same way too, where people ask questions, you're like, what are you really getting at? What are you trying to add? Like, where are you from? Like, that's such the loaded question, right? For so many Asians, I think in particular. And then you're just like, I don't really know what to do with that. And I'm kind of curious, like, how have you learned to deal with questions like that when they come up, or you've been challenged and you're not really sure which identity in that particular situation is being challenged?
I think it depends who it comes from. Most of the time lately, I think because of my personal brand, I'm so outspoken now, and I just luckily get to mostly do business with fabulous Asian American women. I'm not exposed to as much of that. But when raising money in Silicon Valley for my startup, that's when I was exposed to actually the most challenging things. So things would happen to me. Oh, gosh, so many things. I would pitch to an investor, and it was so horrible. He invited his prostitute to have me pitch to him, and that was just such a demeaning experience. And I know that he wouldn't do that. I thought, again, it's that question: is it because I'm an Asian American woman? Is it just because I'm Asian American, or a woman, or a person of color, or woman of color? It's all those questions. Why me? Did I do something wrong? I think often as Asian American women, we blame it on ourselves. So for so many years, I blamed it on myself, thinking, did I lead him on? So there's that happened. I recruited a mentor in the space, very prominent man. And he asked, after I pitched to him, he was going to help me raise money. And he asked, are you going to pitch as the cute Asian or the tiger Asian? And I was so naive at the time. I kind of just laughed it off, but it stuck with me. It stuck with me so much that I even changed my identity. I gave up a lot of my femininity uh, raising money in Silicon Valley. I stopped wearing makeup. I like to wear glasses. I tried to dress more masculine, playing into that tiger Asian stereotype. I thought that that's what investors want. I really lost myself in that process of raising money. And it wasn't until I became a mom that I really pushed myself to refine my authentic self and also start exploring those really tough stories that happened to me in Silicon Valley and those things that happened to me where I just swept them under the rug before.
Well, you bring up the topic that I'm like so curious about, really, because you brought it up in a call where you talked about some of the research that's related to the stereotype that this guy brought up, right? The cute Asian versus the tiger Asian. And I remember when you said it, I was like, that's so fascinating, because I realize that I do that sometimes to other Asian women as well. It's like I just see that cuteness versus the tiger side, and which part do you relate to more? And like I often play way more into the tiger because I do the sort of ambitious, overachieving side, or I did for a lot of my life. And then you also mentioned a study around it. So I'm curious, like, if you could just share a little bit more about the stereotypes, like what the research has been about that, and then just sort of the way you became more empowered to deal with that yourself.
Yeah, I don't think that it's talked enough about. And that's why I try to post so often on social media. I didn't really take the time to reflect on my time in Silicon Valley and also while running the food truck on just all these small things that happened to me and why they happened to me, or these comments that were said that piled up, and how I lost myself. And I didn't learn about it until I went to the Women of Color and Leadership program at Harvard Business School, which I highly recommend. One of our members of our community, Linda Hill, the longest tenured woman of color professor at Harvard Business School, is actually a member of our community, the Authentic Asian. And it's her research that's just fabulous and has brought this to light. So for Asian American women, there's one stereotype that really hurts us, and it's that Asian American women, if they are perceived as very competent, they're not perceived as kind. If they're perceived as very kind, they're not perceived as competent. So usually I am placed in the incompetent category because I have very extreme warm charisma. Um, I smile a lot. I really love bringing warmth to every relationship that I have. But then as a result, then that works against me, especially in Silicon Valley. You're inaccurately perceived as not competent. So actually, I didn't even realize it, but I decided to fight the stereotype. I'm now earning my alumni status at Harvard Business School. That's probably why you see so many Harvard Business School posts that I post about. Every time I'm on campus, you'll see a ton of posts. I want to combat that stereotype and show the world who I am as much as possible. But there's other women who are just so competent and they have trouble. Say if they're super, super well qualified and they're competent for a board seat. Well, board seats really depend on relationships. So if they're perceived as super competent, they might be perceived as very cold. It might be hard for them to get that board seat that's built so much on warm relationships. So that's an example of how it keeps us from breaking the ceiling. So that's one of the main, and there's another big one I'd like to talk about, but I wanted to see if you had any questions about that explanation.
Well, yeah, no, I love the explanation that you're sharing. And it's an interesting one because I had never heard it broken down that particular way until you talked about it. And I was like, oh, wow, like I really see that existing, because I also think, for example, I'm also Chinese American, and in Chinese culture, it isn't as warm. It's like we don't really hug people. It's not as effusive and embracing others. Like my parents didn't tell me they loved me for a very long time in my life, right? Like, so there's just not that inherent, you're not raised with like that same kind of warm feeling, but you are raised to achieve and to do really well. So I can see how that stereotype could come to be, like I'm a relational person like you. And so I can also see, though, if you go towards that side of being really compassionate and kind, people might be like, well, they're not capable of getting anything done. So that was my thought when you were saying it, because I was like, where do some of these stereotypes come from? But I'm assuming it also applies across, obviously not just Chinese, but like across the board for Asian Americans.
Yes, for Asian American women, there's like one of the hardest things that keep us from breaking the ceiling. Another thing, though, is that we're inaccurately overall perceived as quiet. So if an Asian American woman is not quiet and speaks up a lot, that goes against the stereotype as well. And as you get to leadership positions, you do need to speak up. And so that's a really big thing that holds us back as well.
Yeah, I definitely can see that because I had that as well. Like I was totally the quiet kid for a very long time. And then it didn't really matter when I was a journalist because I was always behind the scenes. And so it seemed really fine until I got to be a yoga teacher and I had to stand in front of a room and speak. Like I had to really start owning my voice. And I think I think women in general are challenged with this, but like when you're Asian, you grow up with a totally different understanding of what it means to speak up, or you have other fears around it or cultural pieces that get in the way. So I feel that one too, because I really had to move out of that one myself.
Yeah,
but I'm curious.
There's the cultural piece too. I mean,
Right.
often we're taught not to speak up. And so that's
Exactly.
That's a big thing too. There's so many nuances and so many things I'm still untangling. After every single woman I onboard into our community, I feel like I learned something new through their story, and then I reflected on my story or other stories I've heard. So there's still so much to unbox.
Yeah, I feel like that for myself. Like the more I look into it, the more depth there is. There's more layers, and you're like, oh wow, like I never really thought about it that way. Which is why I love having conversations like this one. And I want to hear your next piece. But before we get there, there's this stat around leadership in corporate America where it's like 35% of leadership are women. But of that group, it's only 3% Asian. And do you feel like this stereotype often is the one that gets in the way for women advancing, Asian American women in particular?
I think that those are the two main that really, from research, from what we've done so far, is what keeps us. But it's also hard because I don't feel like we're given a lot of support. How can I say this? Often we aren't grouped with women of color when we do have our own set of issues, and we're either grouped with just generically women, which we are not. We have different stereotypes that we have to navigate. Both culturally, we have cultural biases and racial biases that we have to navigate that are different than white women. But we're often grouped just overall with white women, or we're grouped with Asian men, and we have some commonalities with them, like scarcity mindset. But for the most part, it's very different. Sorry about that. For the most part, it's very, very different. And so we really have to keep that in mind. And that's why I created the community I did, because I don't feel like Asian American women have enough support, whether there aren't enough organizations, but also we aren't taught to get support. It's not encouraged as much. We're kind of just have tiara syndrome and want to just put our head down and work. But then we aren't able to figure out how to navigate the corporate landscape and how to get to those leadership positions. So I'm hoping that with more programs like the Harvard Business School program I attended, or the community I built, or whatever else may be out there, that there's more resources provided, because there absolutely has to be.
Yeah, I feel that way too. And I actually have sometimes too, because I work with Asian American women as well. I think often we're not directly spoken to. And then that is also part of it. Like we're not used to having our particular needs addressed because they can get lumped into other groups. And so you kind of just be like, oh, well, like I'm just the perfectionist because like that's what happens to any high achieving woman. But then you start to look at the root of what is causing that perfectionism. And it's often typically cultural issues, and much like there are different things that are behind it. So I'm always really fascinated by unpacking that, I think, for myself and then other Asian American women.
Yeah,
well.
definitely. I could go over there's so many other subtle things to go over about being kind of the one and the only in the room, and the one and the only Asian American woman in the room, that I just learned from Harvard. And you realize how much baggage we've carried over the years to get to where we're at. And I think it's super interesting because the majority of women who apply to join our community, they're actually in their 40s. And I think it's because by that age, we've been through so much. In my 20s, I didn't really seek help. I didn't seek mentors. I didn't feel like I needed help. But after going through everything I did, that's why I built it. And I think that's why a lot of women seek help in their 40s, because they say, oh, okay, actually, this is really hard. And this has been super challenging to get to where I am at, and I need support.
Yeah, totally. I definitely resonate with that. I think it takes a long time for us to accept help. And then also too, I think culturally, like that's not something you learn either. Like, oh yeah, let me learn to receive help. And I feel like I have to work so often with women and being like, okay, like let's work on receiving help because it's, it's programmed out of us by so many things, right?
Yeah, we want to give, but we don't realize sometimes that seeking help for ourselves is the best way to be, the best mom or partner or friend or boss, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. Well, and then I wanted to go back then. You said there was another piece then to that cute versus tiger Asian piece as well. If you remember, because I know there was something still else there that you wanted to share.
Well, there's just, gosh, I could go into so many other situations, but besides for the cute versus tiger Asian, there's just other things I learned at Harvard, and I feel so bad because I feel like I dominated that classroom. So you're in a classroom at Harvard Business School with about 90 other amazing women of color leaders. And I just kept having to raise my hand because I would say, this happened to me. Aha. Like so many aha moments happened. And I feel like I got almost enlightened based on my story. I just thought, oh my gosh, why haven't I gone back and addressed this? I just kept putting under the rug. So another thing that happened is we learned about this phenomenon being the one and the only in the room called race traitor. So with race traitor, I can tell you my story with this, and I hope that this will be helpful to other women. I just want to try to get all these concepts out in the open as much as possible so that women are thinking, oh, that's why that story was so disturbing, or that's why that's resonated with me for so long. So I held on to this story for over 10 years until I addressed it. So my race trader story happened when I was raising money in Silicon Valley, but there's an investor who tried to do a hostile takeover of my tech company. And it was a very stressful moment for me and my partner, who was also my husband. And so I went to this female entrepreneurship group. It was just generically a female entrepreneurship group who all successfully raised money in Silicon Valley. I thought it was a safe space of 10 women at a dinner because that's what they said it was. And so I decided to open up, and I was upset, and I told them about this investor, and I asked them how to navigate it. And it was all white women in the room, except for one who was an Asian American woman. And I didn't realize this, but since she was the one other Asian American woman, I really expected to get her support the most. Because when there's so few of us in the game, especially if you're in trouble like that, you look for the one other person who looks like you, and you expect them to be on your side. And when they aren't, which she was not, she was the harshest critic. She was brutally, just very hard on me, compared to the other women. It was really hard to stomach that. And so, yeah, she just said things like, oh, you should have vetted your investors more. This is your own fault. Very harsh words when I was in a vulnerable position, offering no help. When I expected her to kind of almost be my lifeline and help me. It's very, it's not super rational. It's just naturally we look for the other one who looks like us in the room. And so it's called a race traitor when that happens, because you feel super betrayed by that other person because they don't do what you expect them to do. And so that's another term that I just didn't even know. And I didn't realize. It was so great to get that explanation, because for some reason so many difficult things happened to me in my entrepreneurship life, but that particular situation that happened was just so harrowing. And then suddenly I had this explanation of why these things happen. And then I could address it more, and forgive myself, for having those feelings of betrayal. And it still clings on to me a little bit today. So it's important to know these terms and to address them and understand them.
Well, I love it because the language gives you a shape, right, to some experience that you've had. And I think especially because I also grew up in a mostly white, like suburban area, and then you're not used to seeing so many of you around, right? And then it can be almost like I feel like sometimes that when I was younger in particular, like it felt like a competition because you're just like, well, only one of us is going to get picked. If there was like only one other Asian person, so then you're like, you have to be the one who's picked. Like it almost set that up, that feeling, I think sometimes too. So I could see like race traitor being the name for that experience. And like when I got older, obviously like I dropped that. But when you're younger, like you don't really, because it's separate. You like being Asian American like separates you out from the crowd. It can feel like that when you're younger. But then if someone else is there, all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not so special because there's another Asian person there, which is ridiculous. But when I think, especially when I was younger, I definitely felt that because I didn't know or like understand my own unique qualities back then. And so race was like the thing that separated me, you know? And it's like a very weird entangled place in your brain to have that happen. So I could see how that race traitor would come up.
Especially when we're so young and we experience it so young.
Yeah. And so then what are you supposed to do with it? And then you get to be an adult and you're like, okay, well, that's not how I want to be. But you have to start to separate that out for sure. Well, what would you say then for women who are sort of feel like they might be trapped in either like the tiger Asian or the cute Asian? What should they do to help themselves with that?
Yeah. I mean, the most important thing that I learned after attending Harvard and then also just learning from women in our own community is our stories are so important. And stories break through, and they can break through racism. They can break through any biases. It puts a face to the name of who we really are. So telling our story, really meaningful, deep stories through social media, that can cut through that. So that's a really big one. I've tried to be bold, outspoken as much as possible on social media just to stand out because there's actually, if you look at it, there's very few Asian American women who are standing out. Like on LinkedIn, for example. So I'm one of the top Asian American female voices on LinkedIn. I think there's only a couple of us who got LinkedIn top voice. And I really feel strongly that it's, I want to shout from the rooftops to just be that voice and just show that, hey, we don't fit into these stereotypes. We're people. And people, the thing is, people are often just ignorant. They don't even realize that they have those stereotypes built in. It's just from the media. It's from years and years of not being very present in the media and having those negative stereotypes. So that's my goal, is just to help more women tell their story, feel comfortable speaking up, feel comfortable standing out, because also we have to keep in mind there's this whole cultural bias that works against us too. America is the most individualistic society in the world, and the score from 0 to 100, it's over 90. China, Japan, all those countries, they're some of the highest collectivist societies in the world where you aren't rewarded for being an individual. So if you're second generation, first generation, you're brought up with values that value collectivism. Blend in, don't stand out, don't speak up. Well, America's not going to reward you for that, unfortunately, whether you're in the corporate world or an entrepreneur. So you kind of have to go against your upbringing and learn how to get that voice and how to stand out.
I know it's very difficult for you to explain that in like a 5-minute snapshot, but like I feel like that's the crux often, honestly, of the issue for so many women. Like, what would you say would be one simple step for them to start to tackle that? Because I think that is a big part of it. Where I remember one person I was speaking to, she was telling me she had just gotten promoted to a VP, and then she's like, but I really don't want to talk about it because she's like, I don't really like talking about myself, which is such an American thing, right? Versus like that collectivist thing. And it was fascinating. It was just her and me. Like we weren't doing anything except just talking. I was like curious. And like, what would you give when women are experiencing that and they're not wanting to share their stories, or they feel nervous or scared about it? Because like you said, a lot of it is just actually cultural from how they grew up. How do you start to do that? Like, what did you have to do to start to be the person who would like, you share a lot of really big stories on LinkedIn about your own experiences with racism. Like, how do you even start to step into that direction?
I think it's baby steps. I mean, it's not like I learned how to tell my story and understand my story, unpack it, be open to sharing on social media overnight. If you look at, I mean, it's been years and years of self-work to get to this point. So just continue to push yourself every day outside your comfort zone. You don't need to jump into cold water. You can just take baby steps towards that. I do think my absolute favorite book is The Charisma Myth. I love teaching Asian American women how to build charisma. Nicole, if you haven't seen it yet, I do have one of the past recordings in the community is that workshop I have on that. So, I think that building charisma is a really powerful tool. It can come through, and you can use that charisma through social media, in-person networking, at your work. And I think it's a really powerful tool that as Asian American women, we can use to get more power and more influence. I still remember I'm earning my alumni status at Harvard Business School right now. So I took the personal leadership development program. That's the first one I took. And I got this assignment where I was paired up with another classmate to find a negotiation, to reach a negotiation. It was supposed to be super challenging. It's 90% male in my class. So all these men who got paired up, they were just facing each other off, out in the Boston weather, 30-degree weather, and t-shirts, just facing each other off in the cold and these negotiations, intimidating each other. And I was really scared because I was thinking, I'm never going to complete this exercise. And you had to get a win-win negotiation. And so I get paired up with this man, and I think, how am I going to connect with this guy? Because he was nice, but he didn't have kids, so I couldn't connect with him on that level. We were in totally different industries. I knew we had totally opposite political views. We were in different cities. I didn't know much about it. It was so hard. I was thinking, how am I going to build rapport? But then I just decided to turn the charisma on 100%, turn all the things I learned on about body language to build rapport, connection, warm charisma 100%. And what ended up happening is we reached a win-win negotiation in record time against all other 50 pairs of classmates. And that's when I thought, this is a tool, a superpower that women, not only women, but Asian American women, if they can learn this, it would be priceless in the workplace. So I like to teach. I teach a workshop that's in the community. If you follow me, sometimes I teach it for free every couple months. But you can also read The Charisma Myth. And it's just unbelievable what you can learn there. And I think that being an Asian American woman can be a superpower if you learn the right tools and if you learn how to navigate and understand the both racial and cultural biases against us.
That's so fascinating. Well, as you talk to, it reminds me more and more about my own journey in particular around having self-worth. It's such a first step to being able to embrace your charisma, like your natural intuitive abilities that you have to connect with people, to relate to people. And it always has to come from feeling like confident in who you are. And I love what you're sharing because it's part of the journey, right? We're not here to fix anything in 30 minutes. We're here to just have the discussion. And I think raising the awareness, and I know this in general from coaching work, that raising the awareness is that first step to understanding now you can start to make different choices, do things differently. So I'm excited to read that book and to also check out that training because I feel like I'm sure there's more I can learn about. My husband, the kids call it the Riz, that charisma these days. Yes. I was referring to it as the Riz. So whenever you talk about it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's like the Amazing. Riz. We have to all work on our Riz. Well, I love what you shared. Thank you so much for coming on. And we always close ourselves with some rapid fire questions. So are you up for asking a few questions at the end? Okay. Amazing. So Misa, what is the last thing that you watched on television?
Oh gosh. I honestly don't want. Does what I watch with my kids count, or is it without?
Yeah, totally. Anything that's like on the screen, it counts in my world.
I watch Bluey a lot with my kids. It's in terms of what I watch with my kids is Bluey. I absolutely think it's just such an unbelievable educational show, and also it's light, but they learn a lot through it. In terms of what I watched personally, I am embarrassed enough to say that it's Bridgerton. I love romance. So yeah, and I
No
love
embarrassment.
how, also I just kind of tear up when I see it because I love how they have so many mixed race couples and so much diversity and representation there. And seeing a world where mixed race couples are so accepted and it's not even talked about much. And that I didn't have that growing up, So my father's Chinese, my mom is white. And just, I didn't have anyone else, any other families as role models like that growing up. I knew we were different. It wasn't super common. And so it's just so refreshing to see that so accepted on the screen. And it makes me tear up when I see it because we live in a world now where there's so much more diversity. Even as a model, I'm more in demand now than I ever was for certain previous campaigns because there's this huge push for diversity. And I love that.
I agree with you. I'm totally a Bridgerton fan. Lots of I'm always reading romance fantasy novels over here too.
Me
so
too.
I'm
We could have a whole other conversation about this after.
Totally.
I'm reading the Crescent City series right now.
I'm on book 3. We're definitely going to have to talk about this offline.
Okay, we have to talk about this after.
We'll talk about it offline. Okay. But yes, so I'm with you on that. Okay. Well, next question. What's on your nightstand?
Crescent City.
It might be Crescent City.
So there's this really fabulous book called Unicorn Space. The author also wrote Fair Play, which teaches women how to navigate balancing kids and working. And she even has a card game around it on how to navigate that with your husband, which has really helped us navigate that. But then now she has a new book out called Unicorn Space, saying how important it is for working moms to still have a hobby. And when I first heard that, I was like, there's no way. There's no way. I haven't had a hobby for 6 years since I had my first kid. It's just work and being a mom. And then I somehow stumbled upon romantasy books, and I just absolutely, it's it checks all the boxes because I love Lord of the Rings, and I love Bridgerton, and I love mystery novels. So it kind of is all in one. And I feel like my writing has improved a lot from reading so much. So that's my main hobby on the side, my Unicorn Space, and it's been amazing to have.
I'm the same way. I actually don't watch very much television either because I'm always busy reading because of I've got books to.
And also, I feel like I'm gaining. I don't know. I don't feel like it ruins my IQ as much reading versus watching TV.
I agree. I totally agree. Amazing. Okay, next question then. When was the last time you tried something new, and what was it?
I recently went to Montana for a family reunion, and there I did something called sapphire mining with my kids. It was so fun. You just look through dirt, you sift through dirt for sapphires. So that was just a blast. And I tried a couple other new things there. We learned how to lasso a cow, different things on the dude ranch that we were staying at. So that was
that's amazing. Both
it was
of those
great
things.
To experience another culture. And then also in Korea on a personal, without the kids, I went to Korea 2 weeks ago for 5 days because I'm the Asian American face for Suosu, their largest skincare brand, which is exciting. So you'll see me in Sephora in the fall as their spokesperson.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. But there, it was just so fabulous to just be on my own. It was the first time I traveled without my kids for 6 years. I had my first kid 6 years ago. So literally, I haven't gone to travel internationally on my own since then. And it was just so many firsts for me. So, it's nice to be in such a safe environment. Seoul is so safe, but it's also so whimsical and so fascinating and so much growth that can happen. And you can just explore the city freely. And so that was just such a dream to be there and to work with such a fabulous client as well.
That sounds amazing. Seoul is on my list of places I want to go.
Oh, I really recommend it.
It's so safe,
which is nice as a woman.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Okay, well, the last one is so simple. What are your top 3 emojis that you use on your phone?
Heart. So heart is a really big thing in our family. My grandmother, that was her favorite shape. And she's the family member I feel the most similar to. And so I've adopted kind of that shape over time. So both hearts, I would say. There's like one big one and then one bigger one with a lot of little ones.
Mhm.
And then I think laughter is important. So I do the one with the smiling with the tears. That I don't know. I think that laughter is such an amazing tool. Being goofy or laughing, it can dissipate a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety, which is something I have a lot.
Yes, I love that. I like it when I can exchange with friends like a bunch of them in a row, just to like indicate like
Yeah.
we're exchanging some really good jokes here. We're going for it. Amazing. Well, Misa, thank you so much for coming on. I love the wisdom that you share and so much of the depth of the work that you're doing. And it's really making such an impact in the world. So thank you for doing that. And we will be linking all the ways to reach out to Misa and get to know her below in the show notes. So make sure you check her out. And Misa, thank you so much for being on the School of Self-Worth.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.